The wedding procession is grand. Trumpets echo, tapestries sway, and silk from the east glimmers in the torchlight. Outside Westminster Abbey, the air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and roasted meat, but inside, silence reigns. Eleanor walks with difficulty. Her gown weighs her down, her veil trailing like a shadow. The golden thread at its hem is worth more than a peasant's life savings. But no amount of gold can give her courage. Older women lead her, whispering that she's fortunate, that marrying a king is an honor, that she should smile. She tries, but her lips barely move. Behind the veil, her mouth is dry. Her palms are damp. Her stomach turns. She feels not like a bride, but like a symbol, an offering made to power. This was not a union of love. In medieval Europe, marriage was strategy. It sealed alliances, strengthened claims, absorbed rivals. A girl's innocence was traded before she even knew what it meant. Eleanor was not asked, she was simply told. King Henry III needed favor in France. Her family wanted a crown. The arrangement was made. She was placed on a ship, sent across the channel, delivered like freight. One courtier wrote to the Bishop of Winchester, "She is a girl of pleasing manner and good character. We believe she will serve the realm in all duties, public and private." Those words carried unspoken weight. At the altar, Eleanor's hands shake. Her fingers cling to the holy book. She is not yet a woman. Her voice is still childlike. Her body, the church says, is sacred. But in the shadows, sacred means nothing. Tonight awaits the bedding ritual, a ceremony more political than personal. Let us step back. In the 13th century, wedding nights were not private. They were ceremonies of confirmation. After the feast, the guests would escort the bride and groom to their room. Eleanor would be undressed by noblewomen. Henry cheered on by knights. Laughter filled the halls, her silence mistaken for modesty. Behind closed doors, the ritual began. Historical records show that the bedding ceremony was meant to prove the marriage was real. If it was not, the union could be undone. Bloodlines questioned, wars ignited. The sheets must show proof. One chronicler wrote, "The blood of the bride seals the pact." It's easy to forget Eleanor was just a girl, unready in body, unready in mind. To her, the rituals were not tradition. They were something else, something that would leave deep, invisible marks. The bells ring. They are now husband and wife. Henry lifts the veil. The crowd cheers. He kisses her forehead. The people see tenderness. Eleanor flinches. She has never known a man's closeness, and now she is bound to him, by law, by church, by expectation. A letter from a French ambassador described her as pale and graceful, a lamb before a noble lion. But lions do not spare lambs. That night the ritual unfolds. Torches light the halls. The guests sing and stumble with wine, guiding the couple to the chamber. Eleanor walks barefoot, cold to her core. Silent. The room is staged with rose petals, sweet oils, a bed carved with angels. But to her, it feels like a cell. The noblewomen undress her. Her gown falls. She stands exposed in the candlelight. They whisper customs, remedies, old beliefs, warnings. Rub this oil on your skin. Do not cry too loud. Try to be still. She says nothing. She closes her eyes. She hears the door open. What happens next is not recorded in history. There are no letters about her cries, her fear, or her pain. No diary tells us if she fainted, or fought, or froze. Because queens were not given voices, only expectations. If she survived, she had done her duty. If she did not, another would take her place. By morning, the sheets were inspected. A servant, a priest, perhaps both. The red stain was found, or so they said, and with it, the alliance was sealed. England and Provence joined not by love, but by flesh. Eleanor would later bear 5 children. One would become King Edward I. She played her role, devout, obedient, silent. But those early nights, those early years, forgotten? Unwritten. Yet what is forgotten does not disappear. What stayed in Eleanor was not affection. It was damage, physical, emotional, spiritual. Like many queens of her time, she began her royal life through pain. No number of crowns could erase the truth. She never chose this. She never said yes. The veil she wore that day rests now in a museum, fragile, torn. If you look closely, you might imagine what stains remain hidden in its hem. Not from wine, not from rain, but from the ash of girlhood lost and the wounds of a night that should never have been. Worn out, broken, forgotten. Some bled too much, others not at all. In 1396, Isabella of Valois was just 6 years old when she was married to Richard II of England. Though the marriage was not consummated right away, the shadow of that future moment hung over her childhood like a storm cloud, growing heavier with each passing year. After Richard's death, she was sent back to France, remarried by 19, gone by 20. The old customs faded by the 18th century, but the scars were already carved deep. Generations of queens, child brides, silent observers, ceremonial offerings had passed through the burning room, and it continued to smolder long after they were gone. Some say trauma leaves no echo, but stand in the ruins of a castle, and you may still hear it. The hush before the scream, the breath before the pain, the silence after the shame, because the burning room was never just a place. It was a ritual, a structure, a sacrifice, and the queen. She was the offering. You see her there, skin pale beneath embroidered silk, breath held tight, fingers curled into fists. The scent of lavender oil tries to cover the bitter staleness of sweat and fear. Her new husband stands nearby, still clothed, watching. And behind the curtain, more eyes, silent, waiting. It is 1445. The bride is Margaret of Anjou. She is 15. Her crown has barely settled on her head when she is brought into the room. A chamber dressed in saints and shadows, as if the approval of heaven must be summoned to justify what is about to happen. She is not alone, and there is no refuge tonight. This was not a distortion. It was protocol. In medieval courts, a queen's innocence was not hers to guard. It was a statement to the world, proof that the bloodline was clean, that the throne would remain untouched by doubt. To rule a kingdom, one must first claim a body, and the evidence had to be seen. So they watched, not just the groom, King Henry VI, whose thoughts often wandered far from earth, but bishops, noblemen, midwives, witnesses, gatekeepers of legacy and law. The chamber was dim, but the scrutiny was blinding. Margaret was young, raised on duty, shaped by fear. Her story is not alone. In 1382, Anne of Bohemia came to England to marry Richard II. She was 16. The wedding was grand, the feast magnificent. But that night, as always, belonged to the realm. Chroniclers whisper of onlookers. Some call it rumor. Others, truth hidden in custom, whether through the curtain or by inspecting stained cloth. The invasion was real. It wasn't just ceremony. It was confirmation. Linens were examined, undergarments studied. If there was no sign, accusations spread of deception, of failure, of unnatural things. Midwives were summoned, not for aid, but inspection. And even that was cloaked in formality. Imagine being 16. Imagine the cold rushes beneath your bare feet, the laughter of drunken guests as you're led inside, the silence expected as your dignity is taken from you, the way you must pretend it's all normal. They said Margaret of Anjou was strong. that she would one day rule with steel, but even steel bends. Even queens can break. In France, they used to hang the wedding sheets outside the next morning. A crimson banner. People would cheer or whisper, and if the cloth was clean, then came the trials. In 15th century Castile, Queen Blanche II was rejected by her husband, Henry IV, for not displaying proof. He said she could not fulfill her role. Doctors were called. The church intervened. Her name, her body, her position shattered. In these courts, privacy did not exist. The bed was a courtroom, the bride a defendant, and those who watched, they weren't voyeurs. They were protectors of legacy, priests, lords, even mothers-in-law. Their gaze turned pain into pageantry. History honors kings, their victories, their madness, their conquests. But behind each throne stood a queen who endured, often in silence. In the 1100s, Matilda of Scotland, bride of Henry I, had to prove her virtue before her wedding even took place. Accused of once being a nun, she stood trial, swore oaths, submitted to examination, all before the vows, before the altar, before the knight. Consent was never asked. Survival spoke only in silence. Even death was not release. Catherine of Aragon died in 1536. Her body was examined. Her heart found darkened. Whispers claimed poison. Others said punishment from above. But the message was clear. Even in death, her body was evidence. Why such obsession? Because empires demanded certainty. Because purity was power. Because a queen's womb was a vessel for legitimacy. If her body was not believed to be clean, then the heir was questioned. And if the heir was questioned, the throne trembled. So better to watch, better to measure, better to confirm. You see her now, eyes wide, staring blankly at the embroidered canopy. Her husband turns away. A servant steps forward, lifts the cloth, inspects it, nods. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a bell rings. The marriage is official, the future secured. And the girl? No one asks how she feels. She hides beneath the sheets. No applause, no congratulations, only the echo of being seen but not heard, touched, judged, marked, and named queen for simply surviving. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a life lived under obligation. Her body would bear children. Her hands would sign treaties. Her smile would be worn for crowds. And her privacy? It died the night they watched. Even those who never reached the altar were not spared. In 1290, Margaret of Norway died at sea on her way to be crowned Queen of Scotland. She was 7, unmarried, untouched. And yet, she too was remembered for what her womb might have offered the realm. Because girls were not born, they were bound to futures they never chose. We call it history. But it is a graveyard of girlhood. And the worst part? No one thought it was wrong. Not then. The tapestries are still there. The beds still preserved. The letters between kings and midwives still archived. And their voices, their cries, silenced by design. But if you listen closely, beneath the hymns, behind the parchment, under the royal crests, you might still hear her whisper. They watched, and no one looked away. Fade to black. You see her lying there, pale, trembling, legs drawn open, not in power or pride, but in torment. A crown glitters on her head, but beneath it, only red. This is not the birth of an heir, not yet. This is the birth of a scream. The year is 1240. She is Eleanor of Provence, Queen of England, just 16. The baby is turned wrong, her body too small, her voice ignored. Midwives press on her belly. A priest mumbles Latin over her brow. A servant stands ready with hot coals should the worst come. There is no comfort, no consent, no choice. There is only the crown and the child it demands. In the medieval world, Childbirth was not sacred. It was expected. Queens were not women. They were vessels, chosen for lineage, measured by fertility, discarded in death. Her agony? God's punishment, they said. Her cries? A necessary noise for empire. One royal girl, Margaret, was just 15 when she gave birth. Her body hadn't finished growing, but the baby came early and hard. Midwives knelt in blood. There was screaming, then tearing, then silence. A chronicler wrote, "She was cracked asunder." They meant her bones, but the damage was everywhere. Margaret lived. The child did not. She never walked without pain again. They wore silks and ermine, but beneath it, torn ligaments, twisted wombs, fevers that never broke. Some bled for days, others rotted inside. It was not a failure of medicine, it was design. Instruments were crude, cleanliness was forgotten, forceps were iron, linen was reused. If a baby was stuck, the outcome was unspeakable. The mother, often left behind, quietly, dutifully. We imagine queens as powerful, but in the birthing room, they were powerless. Tied down, exposed, half-conscious, drugged with wine or herbs, while strangers took over, not to save her, to extract what mattered. One girl gave birth at 14. She suffered permanent injuries. Her bladder never healed. Her womb never recovered. Still, she was forced to try again, and again, and again. Her final pregnancy killed her. The official cause of death? Rupture of the womb, due to exhaustion. She survived her first birth, but only just, and she was never the same. A handmaid once wrote in a letter, her face was changed. She smiled, but not as before. Each time Eleanor became pregnant again, she wrote a new will, added more names, more instructions, because for queens, childbirth was a gamble, and queens were replaceable. Blood was the price of legacy, and the crown? It didn't sit on the head, it was forged in the pelvis. The water turns pink. Midwives scrub her skin. They patch and bind, not to save her, but to present a clean corpse. Dignity in death was all that remained. This was not tragedy. It was structure, system. It demanded children, especially sons. And if some girls didn't survive, it was accepted, it was expected, it was applauded. She never wore it. She died before the crowning. But still they called her queen. And her child, now motherless, was placed on a throne built not on glory, but on torn flesh and shattered innocence. You see her standing in the cold stone corridors of a foreign castle, her face pale, her eyes hollow from exhaustion. This is no sanctuary. This is a prison. Her body, once untouched by time, is now the most monitored territory in the realm. Every breath, every bite, every drop of blood watched. Servants, midwives, court physicians, and spies in silk gloves. They weren't watching her. They were watching her womb. Welcome to the cruel realm of the womb watchers, those who governed a queen's body like a kingdom of its own, where privacy didn't exist and silence was dangerous. From the moment she stepped into the marriage chamber, she ceased to be a person. She became a vessel, a royal container whose value was measured by fertility, not dreams, not thoughts, only the hope of an heir. Her menstrual cycles were recorded like royal decrees, lady-in-waiting, court midwife, even a priest sometimes. Each drop marked on calendars beside feast days and coronations. One missed cycle, and whispers began. You hear the scratch of a quill in a physician's logbook. Her Majesty's monthly flow delayed. Recommend herbal remedy to ensure health and future conception. Her urine was examined, her meals recorded. If she looked pale, they said she was hiding something. If she looked flushed, they said she was cursed. The pressure was unbearable, because here, Pregnancy wasn't a blessing. It was a command. A queen who failed to produce a son risked everything: alliances, status, even her life. And if too many months passed, the rumors thickened like fog over the castle. The queen's womb is colder than winter? She's been enchanted. She hides potions in her bedchamber. It wasn't just gossip, it was danger. Any hint that a queen might be preventing pregnancy, even by folk medicine, was considered treason. Take Queen Joanna of Navarre, wife of Henry IV. They whispered that she used hidden herbs to delay conception. Some believed she tampered with fate. Others said she consorted with witches. Truth didn't matter. Rumor alone could destroy her. Servants were planted to listen at doors. Midwives were bribed to speak. Even a misplaced glance could be reported. A woman who failed to bear children might face exile, imprisonment, or worse, accusation of sorcery. You see her again? Months have passed. Her shoulders now slouch from the weight of constant surveillance. Eyes sunken, spirit fading. She no longer smiles. Each missed cycle brings dread. Each hopeful sign brings panic. She has become a shadow, a queen in name, an object in reality. Margaret of Anjou was 15 when she married Henry VI. She carried the weight of a dynasty. And when no child came, they whispered. They blamed her. Every failed attempt, every miscarriage, became a political disaster and a personal heartbreak. Her pain was not her own. It was court property, her sorrow dissected by physicians and priests. Because a queen who could not conceive was not just childless, she was a failure. And failure in this world had consequences: annulment, exile, sometimes death. The womb, once sacred, had become a stage, a public spectacle, and her suffering, the price of the crown. She never wore it. She died before the crowning. But still, they called her queen. And her child, now motherless, was placed on a throne built on torn skin and shattered bone. You see her standing in the cold stone corridors of a foreign castle, her face pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. This is no sanctuary. This is a prison. Her body, once a vessel of childhood innocence, has been transformed into the most scrutinized space in the realm. Every breath, every meal, every change tracked by a legion of watchers, loyal servants, court physicians, and silent spies. Welcome to the grim world of the Womb Watchers, those who governed a queen's body with an unyielding gaze, ensuring that her most private experiences became public matters for the crown. The moment a young queen stepped into her marriage chamber, her identity vanished. She was no longer a woman with dreams or fears. She became a vessel to be observed and controlled. The royal court deployed an invisible army tasked with managing her reproductive fate. Her menstrual cycles were tracked with ruthless accuracy. The court calendar didn't just mark battles or feasts, but her period, logged by a trusted lady-in-waiting or discreet midwife. One missed cycle triggered rumors, whispers of barrenness, illness, or even unnatural causes. You hear the cold voice of a royal physician scribbling into parchment. Her Majesty's flow delayed by 3 days. Recommend herbal remedy to restore balance and ensure future fertility. The Queen's urine was examined for signs of pregnancy or sickness. These tests, infused with superstition and crude medieval methods, were both invasive and humiliating. Servants tracked her appetite, recording each bite. Weight fluctuations were noted obsessively, each change a possible sign of promise or failure. The pressure to conceive was overwhelming. In this world, pregnancy wasn't joy, it was duty. A queen who failed to produce a male heir endangered the fragile alliances her marriage was meant to preserve. Each childless month wasn't merely disappointing, it was dangerous. Delay brought whispers. Whispers became accusations. The womb became a political prison. You can almost hear the venomous murmurs. The queen's womb is as cold as winter. Perhaps she hides some secret. Surely something unnatural is at play. And the consequences were ruthless. Queens who used traditional herbs or folk knowledge to influence conception risked charges of treason. Queen Joanna of Navarre, wife of Henry IV, was rumored to have used potions to control her body. Even whispers of such things could lead to exile or imprisonment. Herbal remedies were both feared and desperately sought, last measures for women hoping to reclaim a fraction of autonomy. Courts employed spies disguised as servants, listening for the faintest signs of disobedience. Accusations of unnatural acts could land women in dungeons, punished not for crimes, but for failing in roles imposed on them. You see her again, now after months of silent trials. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes dimmed by sleepless nights and constant dread. The vibrant girl is gone, replaced by a shadow caught in a cycle of hope and judgment. Every pregnancy test becomes a verdict. A queen who couldn't conceive wasn't just childless, she was deemed unworthy. And that judgment could bring annulment, exile, or worse. Margaret of Anjou, married at 15 to Henry VI, bore the hopes of a kingdom. She endured years of rumors that she was barren. Each medical note, every miscarriage, every disappointment became a public wound. The weight of this surveillance was unbearable. Physical suffering mingled with mental anguish. The queen's body became a battlefield between ancient duty, ruthless politics, and her vanishing self. Childbirth itself was a dance with death. With no modern medicine, infection and bleeding were constant threats. Eleanor of Provence endured 3-day labors and near-fatal complications. Yet even after such trauma, pressure to conceive again returned almost instantly. The court's concern was for heirs, not mothers. Imagine such intrusion. Her bedchamber was never hers alone. Servants waited outside her door, reporting odd sounds or perceived indecencies. Physicians conducted degrading examinations based on outdated beliefs and superstition. Letters from queens like Isabella of France carried hidden despair. I am but a shadow in this gilded cage. My body is not mine, it belongs to the crown. Each passing month, I fear the whisper of failure. Failure was not just personal, it threatened the realm. Queens were tokens in political games, their fertility essential to peace. When they failed, nations trembled. Annulment was a sword always hovering, an excuse to cast off a queen and replace her with someone more fruitful. In 1469, Margaret of Anjou was set aside as her husband lost power. Her inability to deliver a surviving heir was quietly used to justify her political disappearance. A queen who had suffered war, betrayal, and grief was dismissed like a broken tool. Even pregnancy didn't stop the scrutiny. Womb watchers tracked everything, from strange ointments to bloodletting to talismans thought to protect unborn royals. Nothing was off limits. The queen's diet was prescribed, humor-balancing meals selected by court physicians. One wrong dish, one misunderstood custom, and a miscarriage might be blamed on her. Imagine losing child after child, each death not only shattering her heart, but threatening her very place in the world. Isolation made it worse. Queens were sent to distant estates or cold convents during pregnancy. Far from loved ones, they labored in silence, watched by strangers, their agony noted and reported. The body bore the burden, but the soul carried the weight. And in that silence, beneath the gilded ceilings and sacred oaths, queens slowly vanished, not into legend, but into ghosthood. In rare moments, some queens tried to resist. Some secretly sought to control their fertility, aware that every pregnancy could be their last. Others clung to saints and relics, desperate for protection from miscarriage or death. But the system was merciless. Resistance invited suspicion, punishment, even violence. You see her again, finally giving birth. Her face twisted in agony. Blood soaks the sheets. The cries of newborn and mother mingle with the silence of the court. This was no miracle. It was survival against impossible odds, and the price was devastating. This was queenship in medieval Europe, the body a battlefield, fertility a prison. The womb watched, controlled, feared. Every queen bore the crushing weight of expectation, the terror of failure, and the relentless gaze of the womb watchers, silent sentinels of a system that saw women not as humans, but as vessels of dynastic ambition. So next time you see a royal wedding, remember, the ceremony was just the beginning. Behind silk gowns and jeweled crowns lurked a darker truth, a reality of surveillance, control, and unending trauma. For these queens, the greatest battles were not fought on fields or in councils, but within the brutal private realm of their own bodies. And the womb watchers were always watching. You see her standing alone on cold stone steps of a foreign castle. A small girl clutches a faded doll, eyes wide with terror. The year is 1396. She is Isabella of Valois, only 8 years old. Torn from the familiar embrace of France, sent to a strange and unforgiving England. Her heart pounds with a terror no child should know. She does not speak the language. The sounds around her are harsh, guttural, alien. Courtiers whisper behind hands, eyes sharp with suspicion. The servants who surround her are watchers, spies in silks and chains, reporting every move, every word. Her new husband, King Richard II, is a shadow looming in cold halls. Isabella's story is not unique. It is the fate of many royal brides in medieval Europe, a fate of exile, isolation, and terror. This chapter reveals the brutal psychological warfare inflicted on these young queens, torn from home and thrust into courts that saw them not as daughters or wives, but as pawns in a cruel political game. Imagine the journey. A child, barely past infancy, shipped across seas and mountains in a cramped, foul-smelling vessel, surrounded by strangers, speaking no word of her tongue. Seasickness, cold, hunger gnaw at her fragile body. She clings to a small token, a ribbon, a doll, a whispered prayer, linking her to a world slipping farther away with every mile. Upon arrival, warmth does not greet her, only cold calculation. The foreign court is a labyrinth of unspoken rules and hidden threats. Her footsteps echo through empty corridors, where laughter and whispered conspiracies mingle like poison in the air. The customs confuse her. The food is strange and bitter, the clothes stiff and suffocating. She is a stranger in a strange land, a child with no allies. Isabella's letters, smuggled or whispered to trusted confidants, reveal a heart breaking with loneliness. I dream of home, of my mother's soft voice, the scent of lavender in the garden. Here I speak only silence. The words I try to form fall like stones, heavy, useless. These letters are rare glimpses of humanity from an age when women's voices were often silenced. They show a child trapped not only at political fate, but by the unforgiving cage of language and culture. The foreign tongue was more than a barrier. It was a weapon. Without words to express fear, pain, or hope, these young queens became mute captives. They could not plead for kindness, defend themselves against cruelty, or even understand the whispered accusations that followed them like shadows. One nobleman's sneer cuts through centuries of silence. She is an alien, a stranger who does not belong. Her customs are strange, her words a foreign threat. This cultural exile bred paranoia. The queen became a symbol of distrust, a living reminder of fragile political balance. Her foreignness was weaponized, every gesture, every misstep magnified into a threat against the realm's delicate peace. The servants attending her were often informants, trusted ladies-in-waiting turned spies, their loyalty pledged not to the queen, but to the court's power brokers. Every whispered conversation recorded, every secret glance dissected. You can almost hear the rustle of silk and the barely contained murmurs behind curtained doorways. Her movements tracked as meticulously as the stars in the night sky. The psychological toll was devastating. Isabella's health, like many foreign brides, began to fail. Isolation, homesickness, and ceaseless surveillance took their toll. Her sickness dismissed as hysteria or weakness by medieval medicine. For some, this torment led to mental collapse. Queens withdrew into silence, staring into empty spaces. Others suffered what we now recognize as severe anxiety or depression. Take Anne of Bohemia, who arrived in England in 1382. Though older than Isabella, her exile was just as harsh. She struggled with language, customs, and loneliness. Chronic illness haunted her, worsened by alien surroundings and emotional torment. Medical texts of the time speak of melancholia, a catch-all for what we now understand as trauma. Treatments ranged from bloodletting to herbal potions, often more harmful than healing. For some queens, detachment became refuge. Historical records tell of women wandering castle gardens in trance, praying for hours, retreating for days into silence. Courtiers saw this as eccentricity, weakness, or madness. But it was survival, a desperate escape in a world that offered no sanctuary. Language alone could not shield them from cruelty. Mockery and ridicule were weapons wielded without mercy. Foreign brides were caricatured as strange, awkward outsiders. Their accents mocked, their manners ridiculed with biting scorn. Court poets and chroniclers often penned cruel verses about these women, cementing their outsider status deep into the annals of history. Even their husbands added to the torment. Marriages were political contracts, devoid of warmth or affection. Many kings barely acknowledged their young brides, except when duty demanded. Communication was reduced to cold commands or chilling silence. Isabella of Valois was married to Tindobul, Richard II, at the age of 8. Their relationship was a gulf, vast, cold, and unbridgeable, held together only by politics, not connection. This cultural exile was no mere formality. It was psychological warfare. By severing these queens from their language, customs, and families, the court stripped them of identity, of agency, of self. You see the pattern: an intentional, systematic breaking of spirit, a calculated design to enforce compliance and obedience. Imagine the constant fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of punishment, fear of betrayal. Every word spoken, or left unspoken, was a perilous risk. In a court of intrigue and whispers, a single misstep could be fatal. Queens learned quickly. Survival meant silence. Survival meant submission. Margaret of Anjou's story echoes this bleak reality. Sent to England at 15, isolated from her French roots and distrusted by English courtiers under relentless watch, her letters reveal a woman torn between two worlds, struggling to keep her identity intact under crushing pressure. But the isolation was not only emotional. The practical realities were brutal. Foreign brides were barred from informal gatherings, excluded from political discussions, denied the comfort of familiar rituals and kinship. Their days were regimented and lonely, broken only by formal ceremonies and the ever-watchful eyes of court attendants. Many fell ill under this strain: chronic fatigue, digestive troubles, mysterious fevers that baffled physicians. Medieval understanding of psychosomatic illness was primitive, cruel. Sufferers were branded weak, or worse, accused of witchcraft. This deepened their isolation, feeding the cycle of despair. You can almost hear the whispered lament of a forgotten queen. I speak, but my words fall on deaf ears. I weep, but no hand is offered to comfort me. In this foreign tongue, I am lost, unseen, unheard, undone. This was the silent horror of the foreign bride, torn from everything familiar, trapped in a world where language was a prison and survival demanded muteness. So when you think of medieval queens, remember Isabella's trembling hands, her silent tears, her desperate letters hidden beneath embroidered gowns. Remember the foreign tongue of terror that shaped their lives, an exile deeper than any castle dungeon. Behind the jeweled crowns and royal pageantry lay shattered childhoods, lost voices, and the slow erasure of identity. A tragedy hidden in plain sight. You see her sitting alone in a dim chamber, the heavy gold crown slipping from unsteady fingers. Her eyes glassy, haunted by shadows no one else can see. The crown weighs down, not with jewels or gold, but with grief, madness, and unspoken horrors. This is the true burden of a medieval queen. Margaret of Anjou, once a girl of 15 sent into exile, became a ruthless queen who ruled not by love, but by iron will forged in suffering. Isabella of France, humiliated, betrayed for years, turned despair into rebellion, becoming the queen who toppled a king. But not all survived the crushing weight of their crowns. Some slipped silently into madness. Some refused to eat. Some sat motionless for hours, their minds shattered by relentless violence, fear, and trauma. The crown of a queen was a crown of thorns, piercing deeply, a cruel emblem of power steeped in pain. The medieval court was a brutal theater of cruelty, masked by velvet and gold. The mental scars endured by queens were as real, as devastating as any wound. Their bodies imprisoned, but their minds were battlefields. Terrified, despairing, endlessly surveilled. The surveillance never ended. The humiliation never ceased. The violence, both public and private, left marks invisible to the eye but searing the soul. Margaret of Anjou arrived in England in 1445, a young bride caught in political crossfire. Her life was a labyrinth of betrayal and suspicion. Yet Margaret was no fragile victim. She transformed suffering into ruthless strength, maneuvering through court intrigues with fierce determination born of survival. Chroniclers described her as unyielding, merciless, a queen who would do whatever it took to protect her son's claim to the throne. But behind the steel facade lay a woman shaped by fear of assassination, betrayal, and loss. Her trauma was not hidden. It shaped policy. It shifted alliances. Margaret's paranoia was armor, a necessary shield in a world where trust was a luxury she could not afford. Contrast this with Isabella of France, the infamous she-wolf of France. Her marriage to Edward II was a tale of cruelty and humiliation, public shaming, the brutal whims of her husband's favorites, and a spirit slowly fractured under relentless torment. Yet her trauma did not break her. It forged a weapon. In 1326, Isabella led an invasion that toppled Edward II, proving that the weight of a crown could crush, but also conquer. But for every Margaret, every Isabella, there were countless queens swallowed whole by the crown's crushing burden. Many sank into silence, their trauma etched visibly in every hollow glance and trembling limb. Court records from the 14th and 15th centuries tell of queens who refused food, who lay awake for days in silent agony, who spoke only in whispered prayers or cryptic warnings. These were dismissed as madness, hysteria, terms used to veil the deep psychological wounds inflicted by years of abuse and neglect. One anonymous chronicler described a queen who spent hours staring at the flickering flames of the hearth, her eyes hollow, her body still as stone. She refused court, refused sustenance, and communicated only through trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks. No name recorded, no cure offered, only silence. The trauma was compounded by the intimate violence many endured. The wedding night, far from joy, was often the first act in a lifetime of systematic sexual assault. Medieval queens knew their bodies were not their own. They were territories to be seized, surveilled, and exploited. Physical violence was tangled with mental torment, miscarriages, agonizing pregnancies, childbirths that threatened death. All were common shadows behind gilded thrones. The queen's health was never a private concern. It was a matter of state. Physicians monitored every symptom. Servants reported every mood. Failure to conceive brought whispers of witchcraft, infidelity, betrayal. Accusations that could mean exile, imprisonment, or worse. Margaret of Anjou bore multiple miscarriages. Historical accounts suggest her body was a map of pain and scars, weakened by the relentless demands of court politics. Yet, no mercy was granted. Her worth measured in heirs produced. Her identity forever bound to the unforgiving task of reproduction. The crown was also a trap, a prison of loneliness. These queens were often stranded in foreign lands, torn from family, friends, and any true comfort. They walked courts thick with enemies, cloaked as allies. Every smile was suspicion. Every glance, a potential dagger. The weight of relentless distrust hollowed out their sense of self piece by piece. Medieval records hint at strange, desperate rituals. Some queens threw themselves into religious extremism. Hours of ceaseless prayer, fasting until their bodies withered, pilgrimages that risked death, all in search of divine mercy or deliverance. Others sank into paranoia, haunted by the idea of poison in their meals, spies lurking in shadows, conspiracies whispered in every corner. The trauma carved deep scars. There are tales of queens racked by violent fits, their screams tearing through silent castle halls in the dead of night. Others grasped desperately for control, controlling every small detail, every breath, desperate to hold on to whatever power they could clutch. Yet the cruelest tragedy was how invisible their suffering remained. The court demanded strength. Stoicism was prized. Any sign of weakness risked the loss of status, influence, or even life itself. So many queens hid behind masks of coldness or unleashed fury born of pain. The crown was a burden few could endure. Even those who seemed ruthless and unbreakable were driven by desperation, haunted by wounds no jewel could cover, no velvet cloak could hide. Look to Joanna of Castile, Joanna the Mad. Though her story unfolded centuries later, it was shaped by the same ceaseless pressures, betrayals, and heartbreak that crushed queens before her. She became a tragic emblem, a crown's weight so heavy it crushed the mind and spirit. The psychological torment lingered long after the wedding night's candle flickered out. Surveillance never ceased, the watchful eyes that tracked their bodies, their words, their loyalties. The court was a cage, the crown a shackle. In the quiet hours, when the court slept and shadows stretched long, the queens were left with their memories. Memories of humiliation, violence, isolation that gnawed like wolves at their souls. Some found solace in silence, others in ruthless ambition or desperate rebellion. Their stories demand remembrance, not as distant historical footnotes, but as human lives etched in grief and courage. Their crowns were forged in fire, their spirits tested by relentless pain. The crown of thorns was their legacy. As the camera pulls back, the flickering candlelight casts long shadows over a gilded throne, empty, cold. The throne of a queen who never truly survived the weight she bore.